right, everybody, we are back, and I wouldn't say again, but we're back for season number 2 now, right? So it's been a great time to see everything that we accomplished in season number 1. We are back in season 2 with some new faces, some old faces, new topics, old topics, everything across the board from strength and conditioning, bringing on doctors, and everything it takes to help our athletes and coaches become better in this field. It's your boy, Coach Coop, reporting live from the US of A. My boy, Coach Jay, is still over in Europe. He's almost done. 2 games left. And then we got another special guest. But now remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below so we continue to have this thing grow and continue on season number 2. Who thought we would make it this far so far? All right, we have Dr. Alexis Cowan. Now, I would read her biography. I would tell you all about her. But if you haven't already, at the end of this episode, I guarantee you're going to look up all the stuff that she's doing and realize that she's on a whole new wave that a lot of you guys should be paying attention to. So Dr. Alexis, thank you for being here with us today, and we're super excited about this one.
Hey, thanks for having me. I think it's a timely episode because I've been working with a lot of professional athletes more recently, and I have a lot to share on this intersection between quantum biology, mitochondrial medicine, and human performance.
That is awesome. No, yeah, I think we've been very excited. I think Coop kind of brought it to me. I did as much research as I could on you. I saw the podcast and then read the book, not in entirety, but as much as I could. How did you get into light biology?
Yeah, so I did my PhD at Princeton. I graduated in 2021. My research was on metabolism and mostly understanding how different nutrient inputs impact metabolism and change metabolism. Circadian biology and light biology was somewhat on my radar at that time, but at that point, the importance of it wasn't really underscored for me. Just the delivery never really wowed me, and I didn't discover Dr. Cruz until later. So fast forward, April 2023, April of last year, I was sent by a client one of his podcasts that he did with Andrew Huberman and Rick Rubin on Rick Rubin's podcast, Tetragrammaton. And that was my first introduction to Jack Cruz, and that really just floored me. That was like a 6-hour 2-part podcast, and I listened to it probably 6 times in a row, and I was furiously taking notes. My brain was exploding, and I was kind of in shock that I had missed this piece because it really emerged to me as he was describing it how just fundamentally important these topics are for not only performance optimization, but just from a human health standpoint, from a disease remediation standpoint, from a health optimization standpoint, that we really cannot have optimal health if these pieces of light, dark, water, and magnetism are not optimized. And so that kind of began my journey down the rabbit hole. And I've basically been studying 8 to 10 hours a day ever since then. It's 18 months. I've just been obsessed with this. I changed my entire life overnight to basically revolve around the sun, block blue light at night, really just optimize, my mitochondrial function as well. And have just seen incredible benefits to my sleep and my recovery and my performance. And so I started implementing protocols with clients, and they're getting better. And so it's just everything has kind of come together to really put me on this path and this mission to want to spread this message far and wide.
Did you always know that you were going to go into the wellness side of things and the sports performance side of things? Or you kind of just I really like light biology and studying that itself?
Good question. So I had a lot of health issues as a kid. I had a really traumatic dental surgery when I was 2. I had chronic recurring strep throat when I was 6, and then I got pulled out of school and homeschooled for a year and a half because I kept getting sick. During that time, I was on a lot of antibiotics, and then at home, I was reflecting on my childhood. I think I had a lot of black mold in my home. During that time where I was being homeschooled, I just rapidly started gaining weight, and when I went back to school in 3rd grade, I was 120 pounds, and my classmates were 60 pounds. And then it continued getting worse from there. Up through sophomore year of high school, I clocked in somewhere around 270 pounds. And then I embarked on a weight loss journey, and over the course of a year, lost 100 pounds. So that was kind of my initial foray into health and my own personal health journey. But from there, I also, although I lost that weight, I also gained an eating disorder and also IBS shortly thereafter. So those were really my initiators into deeper aspects of figuring out my own wellness and figuring out what it means to be healthy and how to achieve health at a very basic fundamental level. And so that really motivated me to want to be able to figure out my own problems and then by extension help other people as well. Though I will say I was initially in culinary school after high school, and after a really powerful psychedelic experience, I ended up shifting into the sciences. So maybe a little bit of an atypical story, but I ended up studying biochemistry and math. And then after my undergraduate studies, ended up at Princeton studying metabolism. And that really came full circle to me because prior to that, I didn't really consider maybe going into the health space as a career. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I've always been somebody who kind of just like sees opportunities and picks the one that feels right for me without necessarily having a plan for like a year or 2 years, 5, 10 years down the line. I've always been much more of a just like in the moment type of person. So things have just presented themselves to me over time. And then if they feel like a yes, I take them, and it's led me to this point.
No, yeah, that's awesome. If we were to just like dive into light biology right now, I think one of the things that I kind of noticed, because with regards to me, I mean, this is kind of something that I wasn't totally, I think I know as far as like UV light with regards to wavelengths, like can you explain the key wavelengths of light and like when it's most beneficial to be exposed to them throughout like our daily routines or daily life? Because
Yeah.
that information was new to me outside of just the UV light.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first, maybe I'll just set the stage by discussing the difference between the modern light environment versus the light environment even just a couple hundred years ago. So, all of our modern energy efficient quote unquote light sources like our LEDs, fluorescent bulbs, all of our device screens, they're all highly enriched in blue wavelengths of light and basically devoid of red and infrared light because as energy efficient sources, they're not giving up infrared light, which is also known as heat. So in the tech world, infrared light is seen as a waste product because it's not contributing to the brightness of the light. But as it turns out, which I'll describe more shortly, that infrared light is actually considered as an essential nutrient for the human body. So just because it's not contributing to the light source and the brightness of that light doesn't mean that it's not having an important effect on our physiology. So all those light sources are very devoid and depleted in red and infrared light and very enriched in blue light. And that becomes really starkly in contrast to natural light sources. So if we look at the primary source of light in the natural environment, we have the sun. Midday sun is over 50% red and infrared light, less than 10% UV light, about 25% blue light. So in nature, there's always a balance between UV, blue light, and red and infrared light. So you never receive UV light without red and infrared light. You never receive blue light without red and infrared light. And it's important to note that because all of the propaganda and the science, the centralized science that's been done on UV light and the harms of UV light has been conducted with UV light in isolation, not in the context of full spectrum sunlight. So when you're, looking at studies that say UV light causes cancer, for example, like skin cancers, that's not done in the context of full spectrum sunlight. Meanwhile, there's actually a corpus of literature showing that red and infrared light protect against damage done to tissues and cells by UV light. And we're always in nature receiving that small fraction of UV light with a whole abundance of red and infrared light. And so research that's conducted with UV light in isolation is very disingenuous and not relative or relevant to the real world. Similarly, blue light. So blue light is also a really important signal to our bodies. Blue light is associated with the daytime, and we have receptors in our eyes and on our skin, also in our blood vessels and in our fat tissue called melanopsin. It's this blue light detector. And when blue light from the environment tickles those receptors, it sends a signal, in particular through the eye to the brain, that it's daytime. And so that's important because in essence, in the ancestral environment, whenever we're exposed to blue light, it's telling the master clock in our brain, the suprachiasmatic nucleus or the SCN, that it's the middle of the day. But in the modern environment, because of our ignorance around the importance of light and the importance of specific wavelengths of light at specific times, we're now getting access and exposing ourselves to blue light around the clock, thus sending the signal to our brains and to our bodies that it's the middle of the day, even if it's the middle of the night. And that has huge implications because that blue light signal is essentially telling our body, okay, it's time to have increased cognition. It's time to, improve substrate mobilization so that we have energy for our muscles to work and for our tissues to be online, for digestion to occur. Versus at nighttime when we're in darkness, that's really the time where our tissues are supposed to be regenerating, recovering, engaging in these regenerative processes that allow tissues to maintain health over time. And so if we're constantly exposing ourselves to light at night, we're never actually getting into that full state of rest and recovery. So blue light at the inappropriate times, that's a big problem. In addition to blue light in isolation, because like I mentioned before, we have to always receive blue light with red and infrared light, because that blue light actually, when it interacts with mitochondria in our eyes and on our skin, it actually inhibits mitochondrial function and can create more of an inflammatory response and basically like leaking of reactive oxygen and nitrogen species out of the mitochondria. Versus red and infrared light, when those wavelengths interact with mitochondria, they actually increase energy production, mitochondrial function, and overall support those mitochondria. And so if you're receiving blue with red and infrared, it's a balanced response. But if you're receiving blue in isolation from modern light sources, that's completely aphysiologic. We'd never encounter that in nature. And it has major implications when it comes to mitochondrial health and function, and ultimately when it comes to chronic disease. And if we look at the literature on type 2 diabetes, for example, we can see a dose-dependent increase in rates of type 2 diabetes with increasing light exposure at night. And simply being in artificial light at night is sufficient to increase your glucose, your blood glucose and insulin, even without putting a single bite of food into your mouth. And so that's why it's really important that we understand the fundamental actions of light on our biology and our physiology so that we can begin to re-engineer our indoor environments to be more like outside, and also to motivate people to just spend more time doing activities outside versus inside. And just doing those things and changing your lifestyle in that way can make a world of difference when it comes to health and performance optimization.
You've just made recovery and regeneration for me a lot more difficult. I'm trying to think. I gotta change the lights in the gym.
No, but could you speak a little bit about lighting in the gyms and stuff? Because I mean, both of us currently are strength and conditioning coaches, and we work at different locations. But lighting in the gym is a big thing. I know. I mean, I've been to Jay's gym. He has windows and whatnot, but not like huge, like to allow light in all the time. And then say we're talking about you have a client at 5 a.m. What should the lighting system be like, and how should the flow of things look like in the gym? Because I know Dr. Cruz talked about it a little bit, like shut the lights off, open up the doors, have the windows open, like all that stuff. But sometimes that's not accessible and not able to do. How do you go about changing the lights?
Yeah, so I'm actually
and also how cost effective is it? I'm also curious.
Yep. Well, actually, it can be even more cost effective than being unconscious in your choices if you're building a building from scratch. The problem is if you're dealing with an existing structure and you're trying to modify it, then things can get expensive. I'm actually working with a couple trainers right now to build basically a circadian light aligned gym, which is pretty cool. And also my dream in the future is to have a whole wellness center that's like a mecca that's built around these concepts. But what I'll say for now is that you mentioned about glass. So something really important to mention here is that standard window glass blocks 100% of UVB, about 30% of UVA, and about 40% of near infrared light. So simply being behind glass inside is creating an alien light environment that is suboptimal for your biology. In effect, it's concentrating blue light by removing UV and infrared. And so just being inside behind glass without putting a single light on is already a problem. So in a gym, like if you're building a gym from scratch, this is what I would say, and we can talk about how to mod existing gyms, but ideally you would want a situation that, you can basically maybe have a garage door, it like opens up so you're getting some natural indirect light into the gym that way. If there can be skylights built into the gym, maybe with screens that can easily be opened and closed, then you can open up the window and then the natural light can come in through screens. If you can build an outdoor part of the facility that you can, bring equipment out into, then people can directly work outside. Even better if you can like make that on natural grass versus turf, because natural grass also, if you're encountering that with your bare feet and your bare hands, that facilitates grounding. And grounding is essentially you gaining free electrons from the earth. And those electrons are what powers your mitochondria. So when you eat food, you're actually eating for electrons and protons. You're not eating for calories. Your food's broken down into these basically fundamental units of protons and electrons. And the electrons are actually what powers energy production in the mitochondria. So people think, you need to eat to get energy. But actually what a lot of people don't know is that's only 1/3 of the equation. The 2 other thirds that we're supposed to be getting energy from are direct contact of our feet and hands with the earth, as well as our skin and the sun. So when the melanin in your skin interacts with sunlight, it can split neighboring water molecules in the skin that can basically form molecular hydrogen, molecular oxygen, and 4 free electrons per water molecule split. And those free electrons can then go on to power the mitochondria as well. So you can gain a lot of energy for performance, let's say, if your skin is in the game, as Dr. Jack Cruz would say, and if your bare feet are on the ground, that's giving you access to 2/3 more energy than anything that's coming in through your mouth. And so if that can be worked into the layout of the gym as well, that would be great. For the indoor part of the gym, concrete is still going to facilitate grounding. I think in one of Jack's homes, he like mixed copper dust into the concrete mix so that it actually would be more conductive. Because essentially you want to create a more conductive environment that allows those electrons to flow, and copper is a really good conductor. Similarly, like if you're at the beach, for example, salt water is really conductive as well. So the beach is like the most grounding environment you can be in. So if you can create like a concrete floor on the interior of the gym, maybe adding copper mixed into that to facilitate conduction and have people working out more barefoot or in grounded shoes or in cotton socks, things like that can still facilitate grounding. Basically, any natural material can facilitate that electron flow, but synthetic materials block it. So all the rubbers and all the other synthetic materials, most people's shoes have rubber soles, completely disconnects you from that flow of electrons. So that's what I'd say about that. With regards to lighting, you really want to be focused on getting full spectrum lights inside the gym. So that would be, there's some brands out there like Block Blue Light has like can lights that are full spectrum. Essentially what that does is it adds red and some infrared back into the spectrum, so you're not getting this very harsh blue light in isolation. So those are pretty readily available. Ideally, if you could have maybe color changing bulbs like I have in my house, which I can change from like a brighter color during the day to red at night. You can also use things like red light panels to add red back into the environment. But the more you can do, the more you can get people just actually training outside, you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck if you have the space to do it, because then it doesn't require any fancy lights or equipment. You're just basically using natural light as the light source. That's going to be the number one best option. But engineering the indoor environment to have more full spectrum bulbs and adding red and infrared back in would be like your second best option, I would say.
How hard is it, to get people to like buy into like everything you're saying and talking about, especially with lighting, and then you're talking about barefoot working out? Like now we're talking about like kind of going back in time, because everything nowadays has kind of been, we're trying to be super techy, super flashy. You look at our clothes and all that stuff, like everything is super synthetic and it's helping you move fast and whatnot. And you're talking about wearing cotton socks. I'm like, shoot, I don't wear no cotton socks because it keeps my feet hot, right? So I'll just go barefoot. But like, you're debunking a lot of stuff that I think modern civilization is against, I would say, or centralized.
Well, kind of. There's like an ignorance, I would say. There's a large amount of ignorance around what it actually means to be Homo sapiens, what it means to be human, and what we require as inputs into our system for health. And I would argue that you cannot have high performance without having health. And that's why you see like the injury rates are insane these days in most professional sports, especially in like basketball, which is like one of the areas I'm very interested in, because they're always playing night games. They're always disconnected from the earth, always in rubber-soled shoes, and always under really terrible lighting at night. So it's like a worst case scenario. And if you look at soft tissue injuries in that sport, they're just completely off the charts relative to most other sports. And it just makes complete sense when we think about this, because not only is that red and infrared light important from like a balancing effect to that blue light, but what it does when it penetrates into tissues, it doesn't only stimulate ATP production, that chemical energy, but it also stimulates mitochondrial water production. So in effect, that red and infrared light is hydrating tissues from the inside out. And when a tissue becomes dehydrated, it becomes fragile and it becomes vulnerable to injury. So it becomes really obvious, like especially when it comes to tendonitis and like Achilles tears, that Achilles tear is almost always, I would say it is always a sign of that person is disconnected from the earth and that their light environment is really crappy, because the Achilles tendon is not really going to tear if the mitochondria in the soleus and the lower legs are optimal. And if your feet are connected to the earth and you're not exposed to like harsh blue light in the absence of red and infrared light all the time, and you're exposed to a lot of natural light, that injury is almost impossible to get unless you're under a lot of strain and tension that like the tissue can't handle. But that tissue is quite resilient and quite strong, so it really does take a lot of wear and tear over time in a poor environment for it to give. So I think on one hand, it's not like we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of things in modernity that we can keep and that we can leverage, but we can't do it at the expense of the inputs that our system actually requires as like a human species. Because evolution occurs over a very long period of time. The electrical power grid wasn't a thing until the late 1800s. And so, evolution happens over the course of millions of years. We're not adapted to our modern environments whatsoever, and it shows. Like, if you look at the burden on our healthcare system, you look at the rates of chronic disease and injuries and all of these things. Like, this is not normal. This is not how we're supposed to be as a species. We're not supposed to be sick. If you look at hunter-gatherers, actually, you look at like the average adult lifespan of hunter-gatherers, over 70 years old. So we barely have gained any lifespan advantage. The only thing we have gained is like decreased infant mortality, which if you look at like the lifespans of our ancestors, they'll say sometimes like in the 30s, but it's because they're including infant mortality into the metric. If you look at adult lifespan, that's, we barely have made any progress at all. And it's literally because we're kind of like cutting ourselves off at the knees all the time with modern environments and technology that our bodies are not equipped to deal with. And so I think the more that we can just understand what our physiology needs to work well, then we can begin to re-engineer it into our modern lifestyles, and we can actually get the best of both worlds.
How does one go about learning about, the physiology that their body needs? Because everybody's makeup is a little bit different. How does somebody go about that? Especially somebody that, that start, like, say we take an athlete like myself or Jay that starts with you. What would be, that process of like learning where they need to be at to optimize their training, and what type of, lighting and stuff that would be good for them?
And also, if it's
the
relevant, like
basic
being black and
requirements.
white.
Go ahead. Yes, yeah, I'm going to talk about that too because.
No, I was
so
going to say,
maybe
and
I'll just
also,
start there.
mine is kind of delayed right now.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. So depending on where your mitochondria come from, that's going to dictate a bit about the optimal environment that you would inhabit. But having said that, I would say if you can't move, then becoming adapted to your current environment, your natural current environment, is going to be your best bet, even if it's suboptimal from a mitochondrial standpoint. So there's two broad classes of mitochondria. We have the coupled and the uncoupled. The coupled mitochondria hail from equatorial regions where basically the ground doesn't freeze, where basically plant-rich foods can grow year-round. These would be, like tropical regions, Africa as well, that essentially these mitochondria receive high-quality sun year-round because in those regions you're receiving high-quality sun year-round. They do really well in that environment. They also do better with higher carbohydrate diets year-round because those foods are growing in that area, throughout the course of the year. These coupled mitochondria are really good at making energy. So coupled meaning that they've coupled the flow of electrons to the production of energy, because that electron flow through the electron transport chain is what produces ATP. Versus uncoupled mitochondria have uncoupled the flow of electrons from the production of energy, and in doing so, they're really good at liberating heat. And that's an advantageous type of mitochondria to have if you live somewhere that it gets cold for part of the year, that your body needs to defend its core temperature in response to that cold environment, and it can do so by uncoupling those mitochondria to generate heat internally. So the uncoupled mitochondria hail from more northern regions where the ground freezes, where you're only growing carbohydrate-rich foods for a portion of the year. The part of the year where the ground is frozen, you're relying mostly on animal-based foods to get by, and in the ancestral environment at the very least. Now in the global food supply chain, you can fly a mango to Sweden and eat it in December. Doesn't mean we should be doing it though. So having said that, the uncoupled mitochondria that come from northern regions are more plastic than the coupled mitochondria that come from equatorial regions. And what I mean by that is, if you take somebody from a northern latitude that has ancestors and mitochondria from that region, and by the way, mitochondria you inherit strictly from your mom. So in order to figure out the mitochondria that you have, you want to look at your mom's lineage, your mom, your grandma, your great-grandma. Where did they come from? That's how you can determine where your mitochondria are from. But if you take that uncoupled mitochondria person and you put them in, let's say, like Miami or Cuba or somewhere more equatorial, over time their mitochondria can become more coupled and look more like a coupled mitochondria. Versus the people who have coupled mitochondria, if you put those individuals in Sweden, they tend to have a lot more issues because, number one, their skin is often not adapted to that environment. The darker your skin is, which typically equatorial skin is darker in color, that's because there's higher amount of UV light every day of the year. And that high quality sun requires melanin basically to soak up that sun to help avoid tissues from being damaged and inflamed from like the very large amounts of UV light and sunlight that are being exposed to the skin. That melanin also allows you to harness more energy from the sun as well. Like I mentioned before, when sunlight strikes melanin, it allows you to split water to make free energy. So it's also advantageous from that perspective to have more melanin in your skin if you're from an equatorial region, because then you can harness more of the sun's energy essentially. But if you put that person with darker skin in a north region that has poor quality sun for a lot of the year, now their body's not receiving that energy that it evolved to receive And that can be quite a mismatch. You can somewhat leverage that difference or make up for that difference with cold exposure. Cold exposure can help your body to produce more infrared and UV light internally from your mitochondria, but they're not going to be as efficient as doing it as an uncoupled mitochondrial person would be. So people can get away with it for a period of time, darker skinned individuals in more northern regions, but over time we also see more health issues cropping up in these individuals because they're not adapted to that environment. And I think actually a lot of what I think about with regards to our medical system here in the States, if we look at the disparities in healthcare outcomes between Black and Brown communities compared to Caucasian communities in the US, we see that there's these huge disparities in health outcomes, be it diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, cancers. And I really think that a lot of that, outside of the socioeconomic reasons for it, is the mismatch in light environment that these individuals receive from these more northern latitudes in the States, because we don't get great quality sun for most of the time unless you're in like Miami. That's probably the best sun you're going to get in the States, but most people are living more northern than that here, and you run into consequences when you're in an environment that you're not matched to. But you can make up for a lot of that by simply just spending more time outside wherever you are. So even if you're somebody who has darker skin and lives in New England, it's not like you can't necessarily live there. You can do pretty well adapting to your local environment by just spending more time outside in that environment. But I would say over time, especially during the aging process, when we get up there in age, it would become more efficient to maintain health to move to a lower latitude.
Can you speak to some of like the myths or like debunk some of the myths that you kind of hear? Like, sometimes you hear like the blue light glasses that people are paying for, or light exposure's influence on aging process, whether that be in terms of skin health or just aging, or Black people not having to wear sunscreen, or any others that you could probably think of.
Yes. So the last thing that a person with melanated skin wants to do is to wear sunscreen. It's the worst thing that you could possibly do. Your skin loves sunlight. Your skin loves UV light. It was designed to receive that. If you're blocking that UV light interacting with your skin by using sunscreen, you're now robbing your body of the ability to harness free energy from the environment, from the sun. And something that I've experienced quite a bit, like for those of you not watching, I'm mixed. So I'm like, my dad's side of the family is West African and some like Native American, and my mom's side is Scandinavian. So my mitochondria are Scandinavian, but I have like, I would say Fitzpatrick 3 or 4 skin. So I don't burn very easily. I tan really easily. I have some melanin at baseline. And I grew up in a very like rural white part of New Jersey, and I always felt like I stood out in like a bad way, so I never really wanted to embrace my melanin. But I think one of the most beautiful parts of understanding this story and this science has been like not understanding that not only is having melanin in your skin not bad, it's actually an advantage. Like you can literally harness more energy from your environment independent of food, which means that, in a foot race, if we look at a lot of the most efficient and high performing endurance athletes, most of them have extremely dark skin, and a lot of them are like training in Nairobi, and Kenya is like not only like right on the equator, but it's also at a very high elevation, so they receive even more UV light than you would expect from just simply being at the equator. And because of that high UV light, their skin is like so dark it's like purple, and their mitochondria are the most coupled you will ever find, which means they're so efficient at making energy. Like it's nobody's business. And that's why it's so effortless for a lot of these athletes to, run a sub 2-hour marathon and barely have any sort of exhaustion at the end. I just watched a replay of like the world record holder, and it's just incredible. And so, but in order to harness that power, you need to have sun exposure on your skin, and as much skin as possible. Otherwise, you're robbing your body of the inputs it actually needs to thrive and be optimal. So sunscreen for anybody who has melanated skin is a no-go, and I would argue that sunscreen in general is highly suboptimal even for white people, because you'd be much better served to build up your solar callus, as Jack would say, slowly increase your sun exposure over time to build up your tan. The more melanin you have in your skin, the more energy you can harvest from the sun. So that means you can, you'll never be to somebody who has like extremely dark skin, but you can get pretty good at harnessing that solar energy by just building up your skin's melanin. And So that would be a much more effective strategy. And there's ways to not burn. Doesn't mean you have to go outside and burn. I have a post pinned on my profile on Instagram that outlines all the ways to help build your solar callus. I also wrote about it in my ebook. So if people want to learn the details of that, they can check it out. But yeah, I would say sunscreen in general, highly suboptimal. The chemical sunscreens are completely out, like absolutely never. Nobody should be using them ever. The physical barrier sunscreens, like the mineral sunscreens, I would say a very small percentage of the population will need them. People who are like have light skin and they're surfing for hours, let's say, there's a lot of glare, there's a lot of UV light, then they may need to wear sunscreen in order to be in that environment, but that doesn't mean that they can do that all the time. It should be literally a last resort. Nature's sunscreen is the shade. So if you feel like you're getting too much sun, go in the shade. And second, if you feel like you're getting too much sun, you can't go in the shade, just put on some light clothing because UV light can't penetrate clothing. So there's many other options before wearing sunscreen that I would say that people should leverage if they actually care about their health. Also worth mentioning here is that if you wear contacts, sunglasses, or prescription glasses while you're in the sun, you're going to be more likely to burn. And that's because UV light actually has to enter into your eyes to signal the cascade in your brain to make this pro-hormone called pro-opiomelanocortin, or POMC. POMC is cleaved into 10 distinct hormonal products, 3 of which are alpha, beta, and gamma MSH. The MSHs, the melanocyte-stimulating hormones, as the name implies, stimulate melanocytes to make melanin. And so if you're not getting a coordinated response of UV light exposure to your eyes and your skin simultaneously, you're not going to be making as much of these MSHs, which means your melanocytes are not going to be as stimulated as they otherwise would have been, which means you're going to be more likely to burn because you're not making enough melanin in response to the sun. So something a lot of people do, especially with the advent of like a lot of the myopia that people have from sitting on device screens from a young age, a lot of them are wearing contacts and glasses outside, not realizing that's contributing to burn risk. And also basically you're blunting the positive hormonal response to sunshine because you're not allowing that light into your eyes. 3 of the other POMC cleavage products are alpha, beta, and gamma endorphins. The endorphins are the endogenous opioid molecules that not only help to reduce pain, anxiety, and depression, but they also help to improve cognition, learning, and memory. They also modulate the immune system. They help you to think more critically. They increase your baseline dopamine level so that you actually are operating at a higher level throughout the day. And so if you're getting sufficient sun, especially midday, which is enriched in UV, then you're not going to be reaching for the junk food. You're not going to be binging social media. You're not going to be leaning towards drugs, alcohol, pornography, anything that people do to get their dopamine hits. Our bodies are designed to be addicted to the sun, not to these other things. But when we don't get enough sun, we now feel the compulsion to reach for other quick hits of dopamine and put us on this roller coaster ride of basically dopamine peaks and troughs that totally burns our systems out. Versus getting that dopamine from nature, from being outside in the sun, is a much more sustainable. It's the way we were designed to receive it. And that keeps us operating from a place of fullness so that we have much more sovereignty and autonomy in our day-to-day lives. We don't have these compulsive type of behaviors that kind of can be very controlling and derailing for a lot of people. So that's what I'd say on that. On regards to the aging front, I would say a lot of the skin aging research, people will talk about UV light, which again, a lot of that has been done with UV light in isolation. There's also research showing that blue light is aging to the skin. And the same people who are avoiding the sun because they think it's aging them are then sitting inside under artificial light, blasting themselves with screens, not realizing that blue light is also very aging to the skin, especially blue light in isolation. It can also lead to hyperpigmentation. There's also recent papers showing that blue light in and of itself can trigger skin cancer. And so there's a lot of hypocrisy in the programming and the messaging around UV light being uniquely bad. When in actuality, when we receive UV light from nature, it's in a much more balanced and harmonious response with the red and infrared light and the blue light together, that's informing our body about our environments, that's mitigating the damage response. And as long as you're not, sitting out there toasting yourself and completely getting, like lobsterified, then I don't really see skin aging being that big of a deal, especially if you're mitigating your indoor environment. So the more artificial light you're exposed to inside, the more non-native EMFs you're exposed to indoors, the more your skin is going to suffer in general. And that means it's going to be more vulnerable to burning and sunspots and just not harnessing the benefits of the sun as well. So there's a lot that we're doing societally that's setting people up to have maladaptive responses to the sun. But if you were to correct these other aspects of their lifestyle, then they could actually get the sun, they will minimize the drawbacks and maximize the benefits of being in that sunlight.
No, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. I meant to also ask you too, and we literally just had a conversation with it earlier. We have a speed skater that we're working with, and he's preparing for the Winter Olympics. And he came in and did a blood test recently, and he's, just for context, he's very, very pale kid, red hair, and his vitamin D levels were very, very low. And I remember we had a training this morning, and I remember he had told me, and he was like, I've done everything they asked me to do with regards to nutrition. Like, I've been taking all my vitamin D. And I've heard the adage of vitamin D supplementation versus the UV light that you get. So can you explain the difference between the vitamin D supplementation and the vitamin D you get from the sun?
Yes. So
So I can
all of
actually
them,
bring this back to my coworkers and act like I know what I'm talking about.
yeah, I love to talk about this because there's a lot of misconceptions, and all of the major vitamin D trials looking at beneficial health outcomes in response to vitamin D supplementation have been completely lackluster. So vitamin D deficiency is associated with a whole host of diseases. We have diabetes, we have different cancer types, we have cardiovascular disease, we have autoimmune diseases, we even have things like autism. Meanwhile, the vitamin D supplementation trials, the long-term trials like the VITAL study, showed that there was no benefit on any of those outcomes. And essentially what it's looking like is vitamin D supplementation is only helpful if you are extremely deficient, like at the level of rickets. So vitamin D supplements can help to prevent and reverse rickets. But outside of that, vitamin D is really serving as a biomarker of your sun exposure habits. And it's not this marker that just needs to be optimized by itself. So the reason that is that when you're exposed to UVB light, you're not only converting 7-dehydrocholesterol in your skin to pre-vitamin D3, you're also making that entire pro-opiomelanocortin prohormone that I mentioned earlier, that POMC peptide, that's being produced in response to UVB light as well. So that's the whole 10 hormone cleavage products. You're making all of those in response to UVB light. In addition, when UVB light strikes your skin, you're also making about a dozen other vitamin D-like molecules. In addition to that, when UVA light strikes your skin, you produce nitric oxide, which increases vasodilation, increases nutrient and oxygen delivery to tissues, increases waste removal from tissues. In addition to that, of course, we're getting the red and infrared light from sun, which has these majorly beneficial effects for mitochondria. So when you're out in full spectrum sunlight, you're receiving all of these benefits at once. It's an entourage effect. If you're supplementing with vitamin D, you're impacting exactly one marker, and you may not even be doing it that well because the vitamin D you take in supplement form isn't really that beneficial to boosting your levels. It can be in some cases, but when vitamin D is made in your skin, when that pre-vitamin D is made, it gets sulfated in order to make it more water soluble so that it can travel to the liver and the kidneys in order to be fully activated into the mono and dihydroxy form. The supplement that you take is not a sulfated form, so it can potentially become sulfated when it's in your body, but that's going to depend on a variety of factors, including your mitochondrial function, and it's just not exactly akin to what you would experience naturally. You can get some vitamin D from foods, like cod liver oil is a popular one. That's actually coming in the sulfated form, so it's in the form that's more bioavailable to your body. But a vitamin D supplement is not, it's not really recapitulating what your body naturally receives from foods containing vitamin D, and it's certainly nowhere near what your body receives from receiving UVB light and the whole cascade of everything that happens when that interaction is occurring. So that's what I'd say on vitamin D. I really treat it as a biomarker, and what I think people should do is get your baseline vitamin D levels checked. If you've been on a supplement, I recommend staying off it for 6 to 8 weeks before checking so that you wash it out of your bloodstream so you can see what your actual level's at, just at a baseline. And then you can download the D-Minder app. You can plug in your starting vitamin D level. You can plug in your goal. I recommend setting the goal to greater than 60 nanograms per milliliter. Maybe set it to around 70 or 80. And then it will tell you, put in your skin type, your location. It will tell you exactly how much sun you need to get weekly in order to optimize your levels. And then when you're going out to do like a sun session, you can just press start and it will show you how much vitamin D you're making per unit time. And it kind of gamifies it in a way, and that's a pretty good way of doing it. And in that way, when you're optimizing vitamin D via the sun, you're going to be receiving all of those other benefits at the same time. And so that's really the biggest bang for your buck. It's literally it's free, And especially this time of year, this is, when you want to kind of be soaking it up so that in the wintertime, depending on what latitude you're at, you can be banking that vitamin D for the time of year where you're not really going to be receiving as much high quality light. And yeah, so that's what I would say about vitamin D. It's not really something you want to supplement unless you have overt rickets. Then it would make sense to correct the rickets and get you up to, just a baseline decent level. But from there, we really need you to be making it naturally in order to receive the benefits.
I know you said earlier that you're working with like athletes. What has been your implementation? What's your implementation of like light look like practically with your athletes that you've been working with?
Yeah, so basically everything in the ebook that I shared with y'all is the basic stuff that they need to do. So we're really, getting them outside as much as possible during the day, training outside when possible, bare feet as well, and as little clothes as possible as well. There's some tan-through clothing that can be worn to even maximize that too, because the benefit to nitric oxide, which is not only good for, baseline blood flow and blood pressure, but it's also important for getting a good pump in athletics. There's a lot of supplements like nitric oxide boosters. Well, not realizing that you can literally just use the UVA light from midday sun to do the same thing, but you need to have as much skin exposed as possible because the effect is local. So if you want, for example, if men are looking to get a benefit for erectile dysfunction, they don't want to take Viagra, exposing your business to the sun is the way to do it because that's going to directly improve vasodilation in that area. So you can wear like Kaniki and Cool Tan. They both make like men's and women's tan through bathing suits, so you can get full spectrum light onto all of your skin without actually being naked. So we're doing that. We're rehabbing their indoor environments as well. We're making sure they're not sleeping next to Wi-Fi routers. We're turning off their Wi-Fi at night if possible. We're changing their light bulbs to either red lights or color changing bulbs that can be turned to red at night. And then outside of that, we're really just making sure they're getting good quality water in, that they're getting their morning light in as well. We didn't talk about that, but getting light around sunrise ideally is going to be the best time to kind of kickstart your metabolism, turn on that circadian clock to make sure everything is anchored in with that sunrise. That red and infrared light first thing in the morning is very stimulating and rejuvenating to the body. It helps to stimulate mitophagy, which is this process by which damaged mitochondria can be preferentially removed from mitochondrial colonies. In effect, you're purifying the mitochondria. That's further augmented if you eat a small dinner meal that's like lower in carbs so that you can get into more of a fat burning state overnight. And then when you get into that state of ketosis during like REM sleep, combine that with the red and infrared light in the morning. Now you're really turning on mitophagy really strongly. That's going to help to purify those mitochondrial colonies. So even if you are dealing with some chronic illness or you have suboptimal performance, you can, in effect, rehab those colonies so that you're dealing with a better hand. And that's the one thing I really like about mitochondrial medicine and just this whole area in general is that there's a lot of personal responsibility and autonomy that comes into play because it's not like you're just dealt a bad hand genetically and that's it for you. No, there's a lot that you can do to improve this. And in fact, Doug Wallace's research out of CHOP shows that issues at the level of mitochondria actually directly impact mutation burden in the nuclear genome, which is what's typically attributed to cancer, for example. So the mitochondrial dysfunction precedes cancer and actually can trigger the mutations that lead to malignancies forming. So focusing on the mitochondria is very actionable, very empowering, and people can see really dramatic benefits quite rapidly as well. So especially when it comes to sleep and recovery, those are two things that people can see a difference in like the first day. So we're blocking blue light at night. You asked about the blue blockers. Highly recommend if anybody's going to be around light that's not red light at night, that you pop on a pair of 100% blue blocking glasses. They should have a dark orange lens. I personally use like Bon Charge brand. If your blue blockers have like a clear colorless lens that they're called blue blockers, like maybe they block like 5%, that's not going to cut it. You need 100% blue blocking at night. During the day, if you're going to be under a lot of artificial light, you want to wear maybe 60% blue blockers. They have like a yellow lens. But ideally, just incorporating more natural light, opening windows so light can come in through screens, or just working outside is going to be the best option for during the day. And if you're going to be on screens at night, you can either use your blue blocking glasses, but ideally you could just use native filters on your devices. So there's Iris and Flux for computer use that will filter blue light out of your computer, and also some flicker. And there's ways on iPhone as well to directly filter blue light out, as there's probably some apps as well. But I have a pinned reel on my Instagram that shows you how to do that to turn your phone screen amber or red so that you can use that at night and you're not going to be receiving as much harm from that. But yeah, the blue blocking glasses, the good ones, like they're absolutely, I carry them around with me all the time. I literally will not leave home without them. And they make a huge difference when it comes to sleep and recovery because blue light directly inhibits melatonin release from the pineal gland. And so if you're exposed to any bright or blue light at night, it's going to negatively impact your sleep latency, your ability to fall asleep, your ability to stay asleep, and receive good quality sleep. So you want to pop on those blue blocking glasses starting around sunset if you're going to be around any form of white light, blue light, bright light in general. And it's going to make a huge difference starting that day. Like you can see the benefits immediately.
What is for you, what does the future of light in medicine look like? What do you envision the future of light biology influencing mainstream medicine, wellness, or performance?
Yeah, I mean, once you start learning about this story, you can just see how we're really shooting ourselves in the own foot with regards to our healthcare system and how everything is set up against us, set up against true healing. Like if you look at a hospital, it's literally the exact opposite of an environment that you would want to go to heal in. It's not only like the worst food you could possibly imagine, full of processed oils and fillers and sugar and high fructose corn syrup, but then on top of that, you have all of the EMFs, the beeping, the buzzing, you have the terrible fluorescent tube lights or the LED lights like 24/7. You have windows that are physically bolted shut, so they will not open. You have nurses and doctors fighting against family trying to get their loved ones outside just for a period of time because they're like wasting away in a bed all day. They're not getting movement. They're not getting, good interpersonal relationships with staff because the nurses and doctors are also burned the hell out because of, all the debt they went into, and they're really poor environments as well. The blue light and the artificial light environments are very, very draining to the nervous system. They make you feel fried. They make you feel like low agency, like poor decision making, just very low, short fuse. And so the entire hospital environment is set up against the actual healing process. So I think that's something that I envision. I think Jack is working on already down in El Salvador, is building a decentralized hospital that has all of these principles integrated where natural light is coming in and there's large windows that open up and we're mitigating non-native EMFs. We're not using all these terrible light sources in the hospital, and we're providing healthy, seasonal, local foods. And it's just a completely different paradigm. And I think it's one that people are becoming increasingly ready for, especially since COVID. There's a lot of, I would say, dissent and discontentment with the current model because we can very blatantly see that it's not working. In fact, not only is it not working, it's making things worse. And people are finally waking up and demanding something better for themselves and starting to look into things themselves and just kind of use their own logic and reason. I think up until this point, we've been just gaslit so hard about what's good for us and what's bad for us, and just being told to listen to authority figures and experts and just follow what they're saying without ever questioning it. I think people are done with that. I've always kind of been done with that. I've always been somebody who's very had a lot of disdain towards authority figures, but I just think, it's time for us to start asking good questions and just demanding more from the people in charge. I think we've just been taken advantage of for too long. And so I think getting the light stuff right is the gateway drug to absolute societal reform and revolution, to be honest.
Love it. Like I said, I've been on board since I got back to the States
with you.
And started learning a lot more about it. So last thing, what is something that you would want us to ask our next guest?
Well, can you have to answer Derek Hanson's question, which is, what are you trying to make yourself better on a daily basis?
Yeah, so what I'm working on right now is mostly on my own performance. So I have always been not a professional athlete, but I've always been someone who's very athletic. Ever since I lost all that weight, I've been, really committed to going to the gym, but now I'm really doing a lot of my lifting outside. We have a home gym in the garage, and so I bring all my stuff out into the yard and really just looking to reach my own peak performance threshold. So that's what I'm really focused on right now, is just seeing what my body's capable of. I mean, I personally just find immense joy in doing that as well, just seeing what's possible. And I really want that for everybody too. I feel like there's so many people just rotting away inside, not moving their bodies and just not feeling compelled or motivated to do so, wasting away the best years of their life because, they're drained from a job they hate in a blue light hell. And so I think that just being able to explore the capabilities of your body, especially moving in natural environments, is quite empowering in a lot of ways. And I've personally noticed like my recovery and like I basically get no soreness when I do my workouts outside because I'm receiving all that red and infrared light that's hydrating the tissues and increasing their pliability, their flexibility, their ability to make energy. And so it's something I've like personally noticed, and some of my athlete clients have also attested to, is that like you can literally feel the difference if you just experience it yourself. You just have to give it a try. So that's what I'd say I'm focused on now. With regards to a question for the next guest, I would say, what do I want to ask? Maybe where do you see yourself in 10 years? I personally wouldn't really necessarily be able to answer that question right now for my own self, because so much is like rapidly changing and accelerating for me that like the sky is really the limit. I'm not even trying to kind of, if I put a concept to where I'll be in 10 years, I feel like it's going to be a limiting belief in some ways. So I'm just like super open to what's coming and all the exciting things that are coming down the pipeline. But yeah, I think I'm very hopeful. There's a lot changing and shifting societally and at the personal level as well with a lot of people that I know. So I think I would be curious to know where your guest sees themselves in the future.
That is
We'll pass it along.
the first episode of season number 2. Dr. Alexis, thank you so much for being on here with us today. We appreciate all your time. And athletes, coaches, everyone, right? If you're out there listening, check out some more of her work. If you don't believe in what she said today, right, do some more of your own research. Check out Dr. Cruz. If you're in Nashville area, you got Dr. Cabell, who also is talking about this stuff too. So it's not like it's just some fad that's going out there. These people are doing their research, and I can say for myself, I feel a lot better spending a lot of time in the sun, not using any sunscreen with all that chemicals and stuff in it. So, Dr. Alexis, thank you for being here with us today, and we can't wait to share this episode.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome,
This was
and
really
we're outta
fun.
here.
No, thank you so much.